All right, so we're going to start chapter 3. Chapter 2 had a lot of drama. We had a fight, and Tom broke somebody's nose, and we got to meet Tom's mistress, Myrtle. And so, really, what we've been seeing develop throughout the story so far is Fitzgerald's criticism of the upper class, right? We have all of these characters who are just not good people. Even Nick, he is very critical of other people, but he's also not really the best guy. And so, oops. Okay. And so we're really seeing that shallowness of the upper class. We're also seeing the idea, right, that money can't buy happiness. Myrtle is unhappy in her marriage because her husband used a used suit. And then, so now she has this new guy, he has all this money, he's got this fancy place in New York, but she's really not any happier. She might seem happy on the surface, but her relationship and everything is really shallow. So Tom buys her a really nice puppy, kind of off the side of the street because she wants it, but is she really happy? Tom's lying to her. He tells her that the only reason they're not getting married is because Daisy's Catholic. That's not even true. So we've got a lot of lies and confusion and stuff starting to spread. So we're starting with chapter 3. This is on page 39, and we're finally going to get to meet Gatsby. The book is called The Great Gatsby, but we haven't actually really met him yet. We just saw him at the very end of chapter 1, looking on the edge of the dock across the water, and then he disappears. So chapter 3 is going to be a party at Gatsby's house. It's flashy, it's pizzazzy, it's the epitome of the jazz era, right? But a theme that I want you to think about is all that glitters isn't gold. And so really kind of reading between the lines, what's going on under the surface of this party, what do you think Fitzgerald wants us to see and understand about the upper class and all of these pieces? Okay, here we go. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths along the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft, or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his 2 motorboats slit the water of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from a fruitier in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour, if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvres, spiced baked hams crowded against salads of harlequin designs, and pastry pigs and turkeys betwitched to a dark gold. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up, and stocked with gins and liquors and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. By 7 o'clock, the orchestra had arrived. No thin 5-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have come in from the beach now and are dressing upstairs. The cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the driveway, and already the halls and salons and verandas are gaudy with primary colors, and hair shorn in strange new ways, and shawls beyond the dreams of Castile. The bar is in full swing, and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside, until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and the casual innuendo and introductions forgotten on the spot, and enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, And now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier, minute by minute, spilled with prodigality, tipped out a cheerful word. The groups change more swiftly, swell with new arrivals, dissolve and form in the same breath. Already there are wanderers, confident girls who weave here and there among the stouter, more stable, become for a sharp, joyous moment the center of a group, and then, excited with triumph, glide through the sea change of faces and voices and color under the constantly changing light. Suddenly, one of these gypsies in trembling opal seizes a cocktail out of the air, dumps it down for courage, and moving her hand like Frisco, dances out alone on the canvas platform. A momentary hush. The orchestra leader varies his rhythm obligingly for her, and there's a burst of chatter as the erroneous news goes around that she is Gilda Gray's understudy from the Follies. The party has begun. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with an amusement park. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all, came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. I had been actually invited. A chauffeur in a uniform of robin's egg blue crossed my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The honor would be entirely Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night. He had seen me several times and intended to call on me long before, but a peculiar combination of circumstances had prevented it. Signed, J. Gatsby, in a majestic hand. Dressed up in white flannels, I went over to his lawn a little after 7 and wandered around rather ill at ease among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know, though here and there was a face I had noticed on the commuting train. I was immediately struck by the number of young Englishmen dotted about, all well-dressed, all looking a little hungry, and all talking in low, earnest voices to solid and prosperous Americans. I was sure that they were selling something, bonds or insurance or automobiles. They were at least agonizingly aware of the easy money in the vicinity, and convinced that it was theirs for a few words in the right key. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host, but the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way, and denied so vehemently any knowledge of his movements, that I slunk off in the direction of the cocktail table, the only place in the garden where a single man could linger without looking purposeless and alone. I was on my way to get roaring drunk from sheer embarrassment when Jordan Baker came out of the house and stood at the head of the marble steps, leaning a little backward and looking with a contemptuous interest down into the garden. Welcome or not, I found it necessary to attach myself to someone before I should begin to address cordial remarks to the passers-by. "Hello," I roared, advancing towards her. My voice seemed unnaturally loud across the garden. "I thought you might be here," she responded absently as I came up. "I remembered you lived next door to—" She held my hand impersonally, as a promise that she'd take care of me in a minute, and gave an ear to 2 girls in twin yellow dresses who stopped at the foot of the steps. "Hello!" they cried together. "Sorry you didn't win." That was for the golf tournament. She had lost in the finals the weeks before. "You don't know who we are," said one of the girls in yellow, "but we met you here about a month ago." "You've dyed your hair since then," remarked Jordan, and I started, but the girls had moved casually on, and her remark was addressed in a premature moon, produced like the supper, no doubt, out of a caterer's basket. With Jordan's slender golden arm resting in mine, we descended the steps and sauntered about the garden. A tray of cocktails floated at us through the twilight, and we sat down at table with the 2 girls in yellow and 3 men, each one introduced to us as Mr. Mumble. "Do you come to these parties often?" inquired Jordan to the girl beside her. "The last one was the one I met you at, answered the girl in an alert, confident tone. She turned to her companion. "Wasn't it for you, Lucille?" It was for Lucille, too. "I like to come," Lucille said. "I never care what I do, so I always have a good time. When I was here last, I tore my gown on a chair, and he asked me my name and address. Inside of a week, I got a package from Crorier's with a new evening gown in it." "Did you keep it?" asked Jordan. Sure I did. I was going to wear it tonight, but it was too big in the bust and had to be altered. It was gas blue with lavender beads, $265. There's something funny about a fellow that'll do a thing like that, said the other girl eagerly. He doesn't want any trouble with anybody. Who doesn't? I inquired. Gatsby. Somebody told me. The two girls and Jordan leaned together confidently. Somebody told me that he thought he killed a man once. A thrill passed over all of us. The three Mr. Mumbles bent forward and listened eagerly. I don't think so much that, argued Lucille skeptically. It's more he was a German spy during the war. One of the men nodded in confirmation. I heard that from a man who knew all about him, grew up with him in Germany, he assured us positively. Oh, no, said the first girl. It couldn't be that, because he was in the American Army during the war. As her credulity switched back to her, she leaned forward with enthusiasm. You look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking at him? I'll bet he killed a man. She narrowed her eyes and shivered. Lucille shivered. We all turned and looked for Gatsby. It was testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world. The first supper, there would be another one after midnight, was now being served, and Jordan invited me to join her own party, who were spread about a table on the other side of the garden. There were 3 married couples and Jordan's escort, a persistent undergraduate given to violent innuendo, and obviously under the impression that sooner or later Jordan was going to yield him up her person to a greater or lesser degree. Instead of rambling, this party had preserved the dignified homogeneity and assumed to itself the function of representing the staid nobility of the countryside. East Egg condescending to West Egg and carefully on guard against its spectroscopic gaiety. Let's get out, whispered Jordan after a somehow wasteful and inappropriate half-hour. This is much too polite for me. We got up, and she explained that we were going to find the host. I had never met him, she said, and it was making me uneasy. The graduate nodded in a cynical, melancholy way. The bar where we glanced first was crowded, but Gatsby was not there. She couldn't find him from the top of the steps, and he wasn't on the veranda. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with carved English oak, and probably transported complete from some ruin overseas. A stout middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles was sitting somewhere drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around and examined Jordan from head to foot. "What do you think?" he demanded impetuously. "About what?" He waved his hand toward the bookshelves. "About that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They're real." "The books?" He nodded. "Absolutely real. Have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and... Here, let me show you." Taking our skepticism for granted, he rushed to the bookcases and returned with Volume 1 of the Stoddard Lectures. "See," he said triumphantly, "it's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fellow's a regular Belasco. It's a triumph. What thoroughness, what realism. Knew when to stop, too, didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect?" He snatched the book from me and replaced it hastily onto its shelf, muttering that if one brick was removed, the whole library was liable to collapse. "Who brought you?" he demanded. "Or did you just come? I was brought. Most people were brought." Jordan looked at him alertly, cheerfully, without answering. "I was brought by a woman named Roosevelt," he continued. "Miss Claude Roosevelt. Do you know her? I met her somewhere last night. I've been drunk for about a week now, and I thought it might sober me up to sit in a library." "Has it?" "A little bit, I think. I can't tell yet. I've only been here an hour. Did I tell you about the books? They're real. Yeah, you told us." We shook hands with him gravely and went back outdoors. There was dancing now on the canvas in the garden, old men pushing young girls backwards into eternal, graceless circles, superior couples holding each other tortuously, fashionably, and keeping in the corners, and a great number of single girls dancing individualistically, or relieving the orchestra for a moment of the burden of the banjo or the traps. By midnight, the hilarity had increased. A celebrated tenor had sung in Italian, and a notorious contralto had sung in jazz. And between the numbers, people were doing stunts all over the garden, while happy, vacuous bursts of laughter rose towards the summer sky. A pair of stage twins, who turned out to be the girls in yellow, did a baby act in costume, and champagne was served in glasses bigger than fish bowls. The moon had risen higher, and floating in the sound was a triangle of silver scales, trembling a little to the stiff, teeny droplets of the banjos on the lawn. I was still with Jordan Baker. We were sitting at a table with a man of about my age and a rowdy little girl, who gave way upon the slightest provocation to uncontrollable laughter. I was enjoying myself now. I had taken 2 finger bowls of champagne, and the scene had changed before my eyes into something significant, elemental, and profound. At a lull in the entertainment, the man looked at me and smiled. "Your face is familiar," he said politely. "Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war?" "Why, yes. I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion." "I was in the 7th Infantry until June 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before." We talked for a moment about some wet gray little villages in France. Evidently he lived in this vicinity, for he told me that he had just bought a hydroplane and was going to try it out in the morning. "Want to go with me, old sport, just near the shore along the Sound?" "What time?" "Any time that suits you best." It was on the tip of my tongue to ask his name when Jordan looked around and smiled. "Having a gay time now?" she inquired. "Much better." I turned again to my new acquaintance. "This is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there." I waved my hand at the invisible hedge in the distance. "And this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation." For a moment he looked at me as if he failed to understand. "I'm Gatsby," he said suddenly. "What?" I exclaimed. "Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host." He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole eternal world for an instant, then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hoped to convey. Precisely at that point it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or 2 over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Some time before he introduced himself, I'd got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. Almost at the moment when Mr. Gatsby identified himself, a butler hurried toward him with the information that Chicago was calling him on the wire. He excused himself with a small bow that included each of us in turn. "If you want anything, just ask for it, old sport," he urged me. "Excuse me, I will rejoin you later." When he was gone, I turned immediately to Jordan, constrained to assure her of my surprise. I had expected that Mr. Gatsby would be a florid and corpulent person in his middle years. "Who is he?" I demanded. "Do you know?" "He's just a man named Gatsby." "Where is he from? I mean, what does he do?" "Now you're started on the subject," she answered with a wan smile. "Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man." A dim background started to take shape behind him, but at her next remark it faded away. "However, I don't believe it." "Why not?" "I don't know," she insisted. "I just don't think he went there." Something in her tone reminded me of the other girls. "I think he killed a man," and had the effect of stimulating my curiosity. I would have accepted without question the information that Gatsby sprang from the swamps of Louisiana or from the Lower East Side of New York. That was comprehensible. But young men didn't ask. At least in my provincial experience, I believed they didn't. Drift coolly out of nowhere and buy a place on Long Island Sound. "Anyhow, he gives large parties," said Jordan, changing the subject, with an urban distaste for the concrete. "And I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties there isn't any privacy." There was a boom of a bass drum, and the voice of an orchestra leader rang out suddenly above the echolalia of the garden. So we're going to pause. We're going to pause there on page 49 because we've just met Gatsby, and I really would like you to kind of go back and just reread page 48 for yourself before we move on. So in page 48, and actually 47, right, when we actually meet Gatsby, notice the way that Nick describes Gatsby differently from everybody else. Gatsby is described honestly, authentically. One of the few people that actually seems to care about making real connections. His smile is trustworthy. He seems genuine. So contrast the way Nick is describing Gatsby being different from all these other people at the party, all the other people he's met on East and West Egg so far, and then compare the description of Gatsby to the other characters we've met. So how does, for example, Gatsby compare to Tom especially? And notice how they stand side by side as our two primary male characters so far besides the narrator. So we're going to pause there because my computer is about to die, and that would be unfortunate if I lost this whole video. So we're going to pause there. We still have from pages 49 through 59, so 10 more pages to read.